It's about 6:30, so I guess we can go ahead and get started. I'll do a brief introduction and kind of call to order and showing the meetings. So good evening, everyone. My name is Andy Breidelbach. I'm a senior planner with Albemarle County Planning Division. Thank you for joining us for this community meeting for ZMA2020-00007 RST Residences. First, I'll go through a few important points regarding this meeting. This is a community meeting, like I said, for ZMA 2020-7. This meeting is being held pursuant to and in compliance with Emergency Ordinance number 20-A6, an emergency ordinance to ensure the continuity of government during the COVID-19 disaster and open meeting requirements of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act. With us tonight is myself, Andy Breidelbach, with the Albemarle County Planning Department, and other Albemarle County staff members present are Michaela Accardi, Carolyn Schaefer, and Megan Nadasta. In addition, we have members of the applicant's team. The applicant is represented by Valerie Long and Charles Alvis, and in addition, other members of the applicant's team with us tonight are Todd Copeland, Scott Copeland, and Brian Yager. The persons responsible for receiving public comment this evening are RST Development LLC, which is the applicant, as well as Williams Mullen, the law firm representing the applicant, and their agents, Valerie Long and Charlie Alvis, as well as the Albemarle County Community Development Department. Thank you to everyone that is participating online and over the phone this evening. When we get to the Q&A portion of this meeting, we invite you to share your comments or questions by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your toolbar, which will notify the meeting facilitator that you would like to speak and you will be placed in the queue. In addition, if you are phoning into the meeting, you can dial *9 to raise your hand, notifying staff that you're interested in speaking, and you will also be placed into the queue. And to lower your hand when you're done speaking, you can also dial *9 again. Alternatively, you can send a question through the Q&A box and staff will read the question or comment aloud. Just as a clarification, if several similar questions or comments are submitted, staff may summarize due to time constraints. However, all comments will be included in the public record and reviewed by staff and the applicant. So first, I will go through a brief presentation this evening, the process, the review process, and a brief overview of this project, and then I will turn it over to the applicants to give a more detailed presentation of their application. And then we can do a Q&A session after that, and I would ask that everyone hold their questions until that Q&A session after the two presentations have been completed. So please bear with me as I begin my presentation. Okay. So like I mentioned earlier, this is a community meeting for ZMA 2020-7 RST Residences. So the purpose of a community meeting is to share information about the proposed project, the development review process, and relevant policies and regulations, as well as to solicit public input on the proposed project. A summary of this input is included to the staff report, which will be reviewed by the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors at the time of the public hearings. And I think it's also important to indicate that we do have Commissioner Corey Claiborne with us tonight. However, the Board of Supervisors member for this district, the Rivanna District, B. Lapisto Kirtley, she had planned to come tonight, but unfortunately family matters came up and she is unable to be with us tonight. However, she will review and watch the recording of this meeting that will be posted on the website probably tomorrow. So she will be able to see the presentations and all of the comment and questions that are asked this evening. How does development happen in Albemarle County? This is just a brief overview of the timeline of how a development project happens in the county, and we are in the far left, kind of light greenish yellow box of legislative review, and we're kind of on the left side of that box, so there would still be a lot more in the timeline of development. And this is a much more detailed organizational map of the development review process in the county. And I can certainly provide you with a copy of this after the meeting if you'd like more detail on it. So what is zoning? Most cities and counties in Virginia have laws about what you can build and where. What a property owner can build depends on where or what zone that property is in. Albemarle County uses zoning to group land into different areas or zones to protect the health, safety, and welfare of its residents. There are two main ways that the zoning ordinance groups compatible development, including the use of buildings such as residential, commercial, institutional, or industrial, as well as the size and shape of buildings, including building height, how far it is set back from the street, the square footage of the building, that sort of thing. The zoning ordinance dictates what can be done by right today. And then the comprehensive plan is the other aspect of legislative review. Albemarle County Comprehensive Plan establishes a 20-year vision for the county. It is a document that contains overarching policies and recommendations and incorporates each of the master plans and small area plans as they are adopted by the Board of Supervisors. These policies, plans, and recommendations are developed in extensive engagement with community members, especially those most directly affected. And for this area that we're looking at tonight, the proposal for the RST Residences at the corner of Route 29 and Ashwood Boulevard, that falls within the Places 29 Master Plan, which was adopted by the Board of Supervisors back in 2015. As I mentioned, each development area has a master plan, the Places 29 Master Plan for this project, and it contains future land use recommendations for every property. In some cases, the current zoning and the future land use designation do not line up. And these are maps showing the zoning on the left and land use on the right, which shows that in many cases, these two elements do not line up. And that is the case for the project before us tonight. And now I will go through a bit more in rezoning applications. This is a legislative review. Board of Supervisors approval is required after a staff level review. And staff includes both county staff, such as myself, as well as other agencies, including VDOT, the Albemarle County Service Authority, and the Rivanna Water and Sewer Authority. After staff review, it goes to the Planning Commission for review, which makes a recommendation of either approval or denial to the Board of Supervisors, who will make the final decision on whether to approve or deny the application. As I mentioned this evening, the proposed project is a zoning map amendment, also known as a rezoning, and it is reviewed for consistency with the area's future land use designation in the comprehensive plan and the Places 29 Master Plan, with state and local authority standards and regulations, and with the Architectural Review Board guidelines, as this property is in an entrance corridor. A brief overview of the project. It is a request to rezone 2 parcels of land, which total approximately 19.51 acres. The applicant is proposing a maximum of 370 multifamily and townhouse units with a net density of 19.77 units per acre. And the applicant has also submitted an associated request to waive the step back requirement for one of the proposed apartment buildings. The existing zoning is R1, which allows 1 dwelling unit per acre, and that is the green in the map on the right side of the screen. And the applicant is proposing PRD, Planned Residential Development Zoning District, which allows 3 to 34 dwelling units per acre, as well as limited commercial uses. This property also lies within several zoning overlay districts, including the airport impact area, the entrance corridor, as I mentioned earlier, which requires review by the Architectural Review Board, and the steep slopes overlay district, including both managed steep slopes and preserved steep slopes. In the Places 29 Master Plan, it recommends these 2 properties as urban density residential and privately owned open space. Urban density residential recommends a residential use as the primary use at 6.01 to 34 dwelling units per acre, along with supporting uses such as religious institutions, schools, commercial, office, and service uses, And privately owned open space recommends just open space. And on the map on the right, the orange is designates the urban density residential, and the green is the privately owned open space. This is just a brief timeline of review of the project. Staff review of the proposal is currently ongoing, and initial comments were sent to the applicant on July 2nd, 2020. This evening, community meeting, Monday, July 20th. And then the Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors public hearings, neither of which are currently scheduled. And this finally is my contact information. So if you have any questions or additional comments after the meeting, you can contact me either by my email, mreitelbach@albemarle.org, or by phone 434-296-5832, extension 3261. This completes my presentation, and now I will turn it over to the applicant and Valerie Long to provide a presentation on the details of their proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Want to just do a quick sound check. Can everyone hear me okay? Great, thank you. Thank you to everyone who's attending. As Andy said, my name is Valerie Long. I'm with the law firm of Williams Mullen, and we are representing the applicants in this rezoning application, which is RST Development. Joining us tonight, as hopefully you all can see, those of you who are at least connected by computer, is Scott Copeland and Todd Copeland, brother team of RST Development. We also have my colleague Charlie Alves, who is here, and also Ryan Yager with Bowler Engineering. Ryan and his colleagues, they're civil engineers, and they have been helping with all of the site development and the plans and applications. And Ryan can also help answer questions about the traffic study or any other traffic questions that may come up tonight, particularly any that I can't handle. But we do want to thank everyone for attending, and thank you, Andy, for the overview. I am going to go ahead and share my screen. We have some slides as well. I'll go ahead and let you know a lot of our slides will look familiar. They're similar to the ones Andy showed, some of them because we use the same county database for our information. So I'm going to share my screen. And can everyone see that all right? Okay, just one moment. There we go. Okay. Again, I presume that everyone who's on the call is generally familiar with the location, but again, same map that you saw from Andy's slides. There's two parcels. One is the hotel property and the other is the trailer home community, right there, both at the corner. And again, as he said, the zoning is currently right now R1 residential, which permits residential units at approximately 1 dwelling unit per acre. We're proposing to rezone it to a different zoning district called Planned Residential Development, which has a range of density options. We're proposing to be consistent with the county's comprehensive plan. As you can see, just for frame of reference, the area in the slightly different color blue that surrounds it, which is largely comprised of the Forest Lakes, maybe entirely, that is a zoning district called Planned Unit Development, which is actually very similar to what we're proposing. It requires that you provide a planned application plan, essentially a master plan for how you propose to develop it, including the types of units, the number of units, the proposed density, and so forth. As Andy mentioned, the county's comprehensive plan, or the Places 29 plan, designates the area for urban density residential. You can see the area within the turquoise lines there in orange, also very similar to several of the other parcels nearby. This portion of Forest Lakes here is also urban density residential, and lots of the other areas in Forest Lakes are neighborhood density residential, which is slightly fewer density or dwelling units per acre. And again, he also showed you this slide, I believe, that shows the areas of what are called preserved slopes in this lime green color. Essentially, those mean that we cannot touch those areas under the zoning ordinance. They're essentially to be preserved in their natural state. There are some very, very limited exceptions but we're not proposing to ask for any changes to those. And then there's also some areas in sort of a yellow color scattered throughout. Those are called managed slopes, and we are permitted to disturb those areas subject to certain limitations about how it's done to avoid any adverse impacts. As many of you likely know, this is an aerial image with Ashwood Boulevard going down in this area, the existing community there. And then this is a photo simulation of the proposed development plan. As Andy indicated, we're proposing a maximum of 370 units, which is comprised of 254 apartments and 108 townhome units. These 5 buildings here closest to the front of Route 29 are all apartments. And then in the back, we have all of these buildings, which are townhouses. The builder who we're partnering with on this project, we would build these units. This is a relatively new type of product that they're bringing into the community, but they're proposing it in a number of areas in the county. They call it a 2-over-2 townhouse. It's essentially 2 townhouses stacked on top of each other. So they would be technically condominium units. They would be separately owned. Each individual unit would be owned by someone different. So they'd be for sale. The apartments would be for rent. We're proposing a main entrance here off of Route 29. That would be the main entrance in. And then we're also proposing a second entrance here off of Ashwood Boulevard. Although this does not show it, the Brookhill development, as I know you all know well, is under construction, and this connection here at Archer Avenue, our driveway would align with that, so it would be in line with it, which is a requirement by VDOT and the county. This is a page of our proposed application plan. I realize you all cannot see it very well right now. My next couple of slides, I'll zoom into it. We also have copies of these plans that are available on the county website. So afterwards, if anyone has any problems retrieving those and you'd like to see more, we're happy to help. But I'm going to zoom in now on the front of it. Again, to orient everyone, this is Route 29 here below. This is the main entrance, and we're showing building envelopes for each of the buildings. This looks like a single building envelope, but it's really for 2 buildings. We have a landscape buffer areas around much of the property, a little bit thicker here along 29 North, and then around the boundaries we have more on either side, so that would be a landscaped buffer. There is a cemetery that's located there already. We're proposing to completely stay out of that area. It would be fenced in. This is areas where there would be a parking lot. You can see the dash gray lines would be the road network that would be incorporated. There's amenity areas here, and after we finish, we're happy to talk more about what those amenities might be. They haven't been officially locked down, but we have the folks at RST have some ideas. Also more parking areas here and here. And then in the back portion of the property, and again, just to orient you, this is the proposed connection off of Ashwood Boulevard. These are the areas where the 2-over-2 townhomes would be located. We have this buffer area here in the back, and this is a proposed stormwater management area to help collect the stormwater runoff and drainage and ensure that the water is collected and cleaned before it leaves the site. We also have pedestrian connections shown throughout, or we've highlighted ones that are already existing or where we would extend it. Just for reference, I'm going to go back one slide. I should have pointed this out. These areas in gray are the areas of preserved slopes that on the prior map showed up as a lime green color. So we're proposing to stay out of those areas. There is one little corner over here and here where we won't be disturbing those areas, but the way the plan ended up getting aligned, it looks like we're proposing to disturb it. We're going to correct that next time, but we're actually planning to stay out of that area. And likewise over here, it's just under an acre of land that is comprised of the preserved slopes. And then there's another area over here, which we would stay out of there. The next page, this is a conceptual plan of how the application plan, which is again somewhat of a master plan and shows the building envelopes and the parking envelopes. This is our conceptual plan of how RST would actually develop the property pursuant to the application plan. And again, to orient you, the same main entrance in from Route 29, you can see the apartment buildings here and here, and then also here with the plaza in between, parking lots around in these areas. Also over here you can tell a little bit better how we're staying out. In fact, let me go to the next slide again where we zoom in on that area. So it's a tight threading of the needle there, but we're proposing to stay out of it. There's amenity areas around. There's a proposed roundabout here to help with circulation. And then these are the areas where the townhouses would be located in the back and the connection to Ashwood Boulevard. Again, amenity area, which might be a swimming pool, clubhouse type of area. And then this is obviously the other half of this concept plan, again, showing how the project would be developed consistent with the application plan. And again, this shows the connection onto Ashwood Boulevard and its alignment with Archer Road on the opposite side of Ashwood. These are obviously some architectural renderings showing what this might look like. These are all very conceptual right now, but we wanted to be able to show the vision for the property. Because the land is within the jurisdictional area of the county's Architectural Review Board, the ARB staff will be conducting an advisory review as part of the rezoning application. And then eventually, before any buildings are approved for construction, the Architectural Review Board will weigh in and have a review hearing over the actual design, that all of the details about the materials, all the design issues, the materials, the color of the apartments and the townhouse units, the landscaping, lots of issues with regard to the rezoning or the building design at that stage. That would happen at the site plan review stage. So again, to just walk you through the main area here, you can see the roundabout. So someone could come in and go down this way for parking, or to these buildings. They could go straight to the back to the other units or follow around the right of way. Actually, there's an emergency access area here that would just be for emergency vehicles. And you can see the parking around. You can see the townhouses in the back. And then over here, just again for frame of reference, is the proposed connection to Ashwood Boulevard. I think we have a few other views of this as well. This is looking from the proposed roundabout to try and help provide everyone with not only some concepts about the design involved, but also just the massing and the scale of the property. This building is proposed to be 4 stories. Some are 3. There is one building that's taller over this one behind here. And this is just a view from the vantage point of obviously the entrance from Route 29 or Seminole Trail. You can see we're proposing to extend where needed the pedestrian path or multi-use path. We know there'll be a lot of questions about traffic. I don't expect that anyone can see this too well, but this is just one of the pages from our traffic study, and we can talk more about what this means and what's being proposed. I'm going to go to the next slide, which zooms in a little bit more on this. This is the recommended lane reconfiguration for the project. The good news is that with regard to the project generally, our traffic engineer studied the intersections surrounding the property. And obviously the most important one right there at Route 29 and Ashwood Boulevard. And the good news is that intersection is currently functioning at a high level from a traffic management standpoint. Our study factored in the full build out plan of the Brook Hill development, because I know you all we're all very involved in that and focused highly on it. And we want to just make sure you are aware that our engineer did factor in all of that future development, the trips from that project. He also factored in an annual growth of traffic, of what they call background traffic, at just over 1%. And all of the details with regard to the traffic studies, the scope of it, and the areas that were studied and the assumptions, things like what's an appropriate assumption about how fast the background traffic will increase. Those issues were all worked out prior to the traffic study being conducted with the representatives of VDOT and also from the county transportation department or the planning department. I also want to note that the traffic study was conducted in early December. So before any issues with the shutdown of COVID-19 and change in schools and things like that. We also intentionally waited until after Thanksgiving. We didn't want to do it during the Thanksgiving holidays, which would skew the numbers. And we did it before schools let out for winter break. But in general, we were very pleased with the results of this study because it indicates that even after construction of this project, if it's approved, that the intersections will all continue to function at very high levels of service and with very low delay periods and low queuing of any vehicles. There is a proposal for having a turn lane off of 29 as you turn into the project on the main entrance off of 29, a turn lane or what they call a taper lane, essentially, so traffic can safely turn there. And then there would need to be some reconfiguration. Again, this is Ashwood Boulevard, just to permit or to accommodate essentially the connection from Ashwood Boulevard into the project site, to make sure that it's restriped appropriately and that it will align with Archer Drive, or Archer Avenue, which will connect into Brookview. That was all that we had. I know we had a relatively short time. We're happy to answer any additional questions. And I think now, Andy, is it correct that you and or Carolyn will moderate the Q&A, or would you like me to do that?
Thank you, Valerie. I will moderate the Q&A, and Carolyn will help me. So it looks like first, we have someone who has his hand raised. Carolyn, if you would like to ask Bill to ask his question.
All right, first is Bill Gofflin. You can go ahead and ask your question. You need to unmute yourself.
Sorry. Okay, am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Yeah, in looking at the proposal, the developer points out several times that this is in accordance with the 29 North plan, or the and I agree with that. But I think two things have occurred, especially since 2016, which we may want to go back and revisit that plan. And the first thing is what I would call retail shrinkage. We've lost a number of stores on 29. We've got a bunch of malls with no anchor stores. So we're left with vacant storefronts, vacant restaurants. And I'm wondering if we should maybe concentrate on our planning on doing something about those before we continue to expand outward. So we're not left with a situation where we have a bunch of residential units on the outskirts of the county and an empty core on the inside. The second thing that I think changes a lot, and you mentioned before, was the COVID-19 and coronavirus. This development puts, admittedly, a pretty substantial population of low and moderate income people in multi-housing units. Some of them are probably going to be multifamily. And we know that these kinds of units are the kinds of units that spread the coronavirus and whatever comes in the future very rapidly. So I'm thinking, you know, is it really doing these people any good to put them in the kind of units that they may be subject to spreading the virus amongst themselves? The other coronavirus issue is we may be faced with the problem of having to provide more space for our students in our schools in Hollymead and Sutherland. And then now we're planning on putting an additional 362 families where their children will be going to those schools. So how are we going to deal with that if the space issue becomes more permanent? Those were my comments on that.
Andy, would you like us to respond, or do you want to take any of those? We're happy to do that. Or
You can
maybe you
respond.
should-
Or was there one specifically?
Well, we'll go ahead and talk about all those. With regard to the issue of the retail shrinkage since 2016, you know, certainly things change. That's why the county comprehensive plans get updated they have to update a portion of the comprehensive plan every 5 years under state law. They usually go about doing that and in sort of certain areas at a time. But until that happens, the current master plan is the plan that we have to work with. And right now it designates this area for urban density residential. So it's certainly possible that in the future that could change, but right now that is how it's designated. So any redevelopment of the property would need to be consistent with that designation. And this application is consistent with that in terms of the proposed usage and also the proposed density. With regard to your comment or question about the COVID-19 and the fact that apartments and other communities like this could be higher risk, you know, obviously we're relatively new into this, but there's, you know, lots of issues. One, this project wouldn't be developed for at least another probably 18 months at the very earliest based on the timing for the county's review and just construction generally. My goodness, hopefully for all of our sakes that by then we will have a very accurate and well-tested and effective vaccine for all of us, and we'll be living in a hopefully a much more normal situation then than we are right now. Obviously there'll be lots of changes. I think everyone's, you know, recognizes that, but in terms of you know, long-term development patterns and strategies, I don't foresee the county moving away from the type of urban density residential that's contemplated for this property and others like it. I think the challenge will be for everyone to figure out how we can all hopefully live and work together and be safe and take care of everyone and comply with whatever regulations might be in or protocols might be in effect at the time. But hopefully, again, with our research team and physicians and everyone, that we'll have a good vaccine by then. So I think that's everything that I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. The next question was a written question. Current is 1 per acre as per master plan. Proposal is for 19.77 units per acre. Why was the Places 29 plan even made if it can be changed so easily? So I can answer that. The current zoning of this property, which is the current by right, which of the property is 1 unit, is R1 residential, which allows 1 unit per acre. So the developer could currently develop that property at 1 dwelling unit per acre. However, the Places 29 master plan recommends the land use for these 2 parcels as urban density residential. And within the urban density residential designation, the Places 29 master plan recommends a density between 6 and 34 units per acre. And so the applicant is proposing 19.77 units per acre, which falls roughly in the middle of that range recommended by the Places 29 master plan of 6 to 34 units per acre. So the next question is, would the 2/2 townhomes be 2-story?
Yes, they would. Each of the units would be 2 stories. So for a total of 4 stories of those total buildings.
So the next question is, are all the folks in the current trailer park to be discussed? Also, the development does not seem at all visually elegant. What measures are to be taken so it is visible from Route 29?
Take the first question first. All of the residents in the community, our project team has been working very closely with them since they purchased the property in November. As some may know, but it was under common ownership and management by a prior owner for over 30 years. I think he acquired the property in 1988, and he was managing it all along, or at least to our understanding, for a long time. And when Scott and Todd at RST Development started meeting with him, one of the things he cared about the most was ensuring that the residents in the community already had plenty of time to make other arrangements and not be displaced on very short notice, that they just wanted them to have a lot of time. So actually, under the terms of even the purchase of the property, RST gave them a year's time to help figure out other solutions and to work with them. That deadline is actually coming up at the end of November, but RST is already working internally with their team and with the property manager to figure out what's an appropriate extension of that. They don't want to displace or ask any of the residents to leave on short notice if it's not necessary. They're not ready to start redevelopment yet. We obviously have to work through this process, plus the site plan process and other review processes at the county level. We're very fortunate that the prior owner, Mr. Howie, was willing to continue to work with Scott and his team and manage the property for them and work with all of the residents who we already had a relationship with to help try and provide them with resources and guidance and other information. So a number of the residents have already moved and made other arrangements. There are a number who are still there and are, again, Mr. Howie and others are continuing to work with those residents going forward. And we'll also be putting together a plan to a relocation plan pursuant to some feedback we received from the county and working with the county and nonprofit agencies and other resources to help make it as smooth of a process as possible and not be overly burdensome. So again, that timeline is probably going to be extended a little bit. They don't know yet what, but we did want to make everyone know that we're very sensitive to that issue and want to work with those folks going forward. Forgive me, I can't remember what the second question was. There was a two-part question.
What measure, also the development does not seem at all visually elegant. What measures are to be taken so it is all not visible from Route 29?
Thank you. Well, one, the images that we showed are, as I stated, just conceptual. Obviously, lots of people have different opinions about what's the appropriate architecture and design for the area. The Architectural Review Board will play a role in the ultimate design, both in terms of the advisory review as part of this rezoning application. They will weigh in about how the proposal at this point is consistent or not consistent with the county's designated design guidelines. And then again, if the rezoning is approved and we go to the site plan stage, at that point there will be lots of specific details that will have to be worked out at that point about the actual design, much more detail, much more commitment in terms of what it will look like. And all of those details have to be approved by the county's Architectural Review Board. Thanks.
So then we have several questions about the buffer areas that I think can be grouped together, including speaking to the buffer area that runs along the Forest Lakes neighborhood. How much space are you actually talking about in that area? And what will the wastewater runoff area look, sound, and smell like, which is there near the buffer? As well as why would the larger buffer be alongside the major road and not alongside the single family homes in Forest Lakes? That does not seem very neighborly.
Okay, well, we're happy to address that. I'm pulling up my plans just so I can see. In the back side, we have adjacent to the Ashland Community Association, or the Ashland Townhomes, there's currently a 20-foot buffer, but there's also 75 feet total of additional land. Some of that is stormwater management area, but it would not be developed with buildings. So it's actually a much larger buffer than it might appear. That 20 feet would be undisturbed, left in its natural state, but then a larger area that would serve as effectively an extension of that open area. Along Route 29, the reason it's larger is because the Places Master Plan, Places 29 Master Plan contemplates a green area there. So that may be that we get feedback from others who say that's not necessary, in which case, we take another look at it. But based on our read of the master plan, we understand that area needs to be left alone to be consistent with essentially a forested buffer area or condition along that area. And then along the portion of the property adjacent to Ashwood Boulevard, likewise, there would be a 20-foot buffer, and then also additional land that would be, a total of 70 feet between the edge of the property line and where the building envelope would start. So it's a larger area. There'd be room for additional landscaping and so forth in that area. And then there's also an amenity area on the portion of the property that's south of the connection to Ashwood Boulevard. So that would be some open space. So the developers really worked hard, and the civil engineers, to try and be very sensitive to the adjacent neighborhoods and provide for undeveloped areas and buffers, but also make sure the buildings are far enough away and that allow space for landscaping and other screening that will eventually be, the details of which will be determined at the site plan stage. Thank you.
Okay, Carolyn, can you please dial in our next live caller who has a question? Yes, Anthony, I think you're good to go. It doesn't sound like we can hear you, Anthony.
I don't.
Hello?
Yes.
Hey, I live in one of the houses, right, it's actually going to be bordering this new development. The urban, I have a question on the urban density zoning issue. The townhomes that are on the other side of the woods from me are pretty nice. They're pretty well done. There's not a lot of density there. It's the same zoning as what you guys are going to put in this development here. And it just seems like it's vastly different. And I understand, I heard the explanation you had earlier for why that is. But for this neighborhood that I'm in, which is a single family home neighborhood, to look out through a 20-foot buffer into 4-story buildings doesn't seem very appealing to me. And we're going to have serious light pollution and all kinds of congestion just feet away from our single family homes. If it was something that looked a little bit more like these row houses across the way here that are already built, I'd have no problem with it. But this is, at this point, from what I can tell, I'm going to be looking out into red and yellow 4-story apartments from the single family home I live in.
I'm happy to address that. Thanks for your question, Mr. Smith. For clarification, the zoning is, while it's somewhat similar in terms of the format as compared to Forest Lakes, in the sense that each of them are based on the concept of preparing a master plan and proposing an amount of dwelling units per acre, or so-called density. The zoning is different. What we're proposing is called planned residential development, and Forest Lakes is mostly, if not entirely, zone planned unit development, which is similar in many ways in terms of concept. I don't know what the maximum density levels are in Forest Lakes. I believe it varies depending on the various neighborhoods within Forest Lakes. But with this location, again, the county's master plan does contemplate and designate this area for this amount of density. It actually contemplates it going up to 34 dwelling units per acre in this location. But as Andy mentioned, what we're proposing would be just under 20 dwelling units per acre. So we worked hard to really balance, find a balance there between what's right based on the comprehensive plan, not max it out, make sure that there's sufficient buffer area and space within the project, obviously enough amenity areas and parking and all of those things. And again, the buffer area, it's just a 20-foot that would be absolutely left alone, but then would be supplemented by the additional land in between. So we didn't want to put the buildings right up against the property line, or we wanted to keep them back an appropriate distance so that they wouldn't be right on top of each other. It's fairly consistent with the distances involved from the Forest Lakes townhomes. It's actually, I think, a little bit further back. Obviously, the Forest Lakes varies a little bit because it's not in an even row adjacent to this area. But we did try to be very thoughtful about it. And the colors that you're referencing, those are merely conceptual, just to throw something out there so people could see what it might look like. But it's, other than just having white boxes, we wanted to show some colors. But again, we appreciate your feedback. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add from our team to that question. Thank you. And let me address one comment. You mentioned light pollution. As part of the county review process, the site plan will require that any lighting fixtures within the project be consistent with the county's very stringent lighting ordinance, which among other things requires lighting fixtures to be what they call full cutoff fixtures or down shielded, so that there's not allowed to be any light fixtures that shine bright up into the sky or into neighbors' homes or anything like that. It's very strictly regulated, and there's even limitations that you can't have light spillover onto adjacent parcels. And that too is highly regulated by the county's site plan review process. So I think that's everything I had, unless anyone else has anything to add. Okay, thank you for your question and comment.
So we had a previous caller, Anthony, who was unable to connect. However, he wrote his comment through the Q&A in the chat form. So I wanted to go ahead and ask that. And the question is affordable housing provided for in this development, as well as is the county willing to fund another school, as there will be an increased school population with this development?
Thank you. Good questions. Absolutely, the project will include affordable housing, consistent with, at a minimum, the county's comprehensive plan for affordable housing, which would require that all any residential projects, that 15% of the units would be affordable housing or would qualify as affordable housing under the county's definition. And that definition is roughly that they would be affordable to families or individuals earning up to 80% of the area median income. So that's the standard. At this point, the proposal is that they would be, we're not sure exactly how it'll all work, but the concept is that the townhouse units that are in the back, that the lower level of those units, again, it's two townhouses essentially stacked on top of each other, that those would comprise the affordable units in the area. But we're still working through a lot of those details. But we absolutely will have affordable housing, and especially given the nature of this property. And then with regard to schools, I saw someone else had asked on the Q&A which schools would these families' children attend, and obviously the same schools that are in the Forest Lakes community. We're aware that there's challenges right now with the capacity of both Hollymead and Albemarle High School. I know that as part of the Brookhill project, that the owner and developer of that property has committed to donate land for both an elementary school and a high school. Obviously that's far away and would require additional expenditures by the county to construct those schools if and when at the appropriate time. But based on the information we have, there would be capacity, or, you know, that has been addressed in terms of future location for those schools. And so we'd have to take a look at what's a reasonable projection for students in this area in terms of how many students this project would likely generate. And so that's part of what we'll be working through with the county staff going forward. But there's obviously been students and children who've been living in this property at this site for many, many years. So in some respects, it's probably not only a one-to-one replacement. This would be more units than are there currently or have been there currently, but it's not as if this land is undeveloped. There have been children in the public schools that have lived at this property. Thank you.
So the next question that we have in the chat is, has Archer Avenue been approved? Valerie has mentioned that road a couple times in her presentation. Archer Avenue is one of the proposed roads in the Brook Hill development to the south. And yes, the general location of that road was approved when the Brook Hill zoning map amendment was approved by the Board of Supervisors several years ago. However, the exact design and specific details of its construction have not yet been approved. That would require a road plan to be submitted to the county for review and approval by the county's engineering division as well as VDOT. And at this time, no road plans have been submitted to the county. So the general location of Archer Avenue has been approved, but the final design and details of construction have not been approved at this time. The next, there's a comment about the 2/2 condos. The 2/2 condos are not much different in design than apartments. They will hover over neighboring communities, and there should not be a step back exception granted. And then the next question is for you, Valerie. All of the public concept maps to date, other than the TIA map, seem to propose apartments in the back of this property. Yet you have been saying that apartments will be located closer to 29 North. Can you speak to the developer's intentions to keep the apartments toward the front of this proposed development?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Yes, the concept plan, or the plan, is to have the apartments be in the 5 buildings that are closer to Route 29, and the units that are along the backside adjacent to the Ashwood community would be the 2/2 townhouses. So we're happy to commit to more to that, but that is certainly the plan based on the footprints and the building envelopes that have been designed and drawn for those areas. That's what would fit, and that's the intention to provide them there. I hope that addresses the question more. That, and someone else mentioned, and maybe it was in the same question, that they look very similar. Again, the 2/2s, those are actual townhouses. Each would be individually owned. They're just stacked on top of each other. It makes them, it makes it easier to keep the price points at levels that can be more affordable for families or individuals than it would otherwise be if they were just a single townhouse unit by itself.
And Valerie, can you just clarify the height of the 2/2, both in the number of stories that the actual structure will be, as well as the height and number of feet that the structures will be, so that our attendees have a better understanding of the general height of those buildings, what they are proposed to be?
I need to come back to you on the specific height. I'll need to consult my plans here for a minute. But in terms of the number of floors, it's essentially a 4-story building total. Again, two townhouses and stacked on top of each other, and each of the townhouses would be 2 stories, much like maybe not all townhouses are that way, because I know a lot of townhouses are 3 stories, but a 2-story townhouse with a 2-story townhouse stacked on top of it for a total of 4.
Okay, thank you, Valerie. There have been some questions about the exact height of what those structures are proposed to be.
I'll come back to that while you talk, or maybe Brian can help me in the meantime. I don't want to give the wrong answer.
Did you have anything to add, Ryan?
No, I will be looking as well.
Okay. While they look at that, there are a few comments that have come in that I can read through in the chat. The first is that the intersection between Ashwood, Archer, and the new road is going to be a mess in the morning. I'm imagining the Brook Hill people turning right and the new development turning left to get onto Ashwood to get to the schools, with the rest of Forest Lakes heading toward the lights on 29. And then there was also a question, does the traffic analysis consider safety? Some terrible accidents with pedestrians have taken place along Ashwood. And I can let Ryan answer that. However, I do know that any traffic plans as well as the traffic analysis are reviewed by VDOT at this application. And VDOT does consider safety in their review of project applications.
Absolutely, thank you. Just to piggyback on that, we did have a scoping meeting as part of the initial TIA discussion with VDOT and the county transportation planning staff, and discussed this very concern with safety along Ashwood, safety along Route 29, and came up with a plan associated with the TIA to mitigate those measures. Everything is consistent with the current standards through the county and VDOT, and if this plan were to go forward to the site plan stage, those design details will be incorporated with that actual site plan and road plan submission as well. And also to speak onto the crash data, that is actually something analyzed as part of the TIA as well and included in the appendices of the TIA, and both in vehicular accidents as well as pedestrian accidents and are taken account for.
And Ryan, I think the next question also goes off of that. The TIA says it includes Brook Hill, however, it does not seem to include North Point or any of the other parcels that may be developed in the Places 29 plan.
Correct. So as part of that scoping meeting with VDOT and county staff, we looked at adjacent developments as well as developments that are planned for that have approved plans for the future, and was determined at that time that Brook Hill would be the primary focus of that area with the immediate impact with Archer and Ashwood, and that North Point would be considered as part of that growth factor that Valerie mentioned at the beginning of the presentation here with the overall growth of Route 29.
Okay, the next question in the chat is, has the demand for this development been documented?
Valerie, you want me to take that one?
Sure, that'd be great.
Good evening, Scott Copeland. It has, as we kind of work through this process, and Valerie alluded to it a little bit earlier, that it's a very lengthy process in terms of the rezoning or the amendment, and then through site plan and so on and so forth. But the project, there is demand. There's a lot of exciting stuff happening up in and around the area, but there certainly is demand for this type of product, and we'll continue to refine that analysis as we get closer to identifying how we're going to finance the project.
And Andy, I have the answer to the question about the building height, if now would be a good time to jump in before we get
Certainly.
too far away from that. I've pulled up some renderings and I'd be happy to share my screen, or maybe the easier thing would be to post copies of these renderings on the website where the other materials are posted. But the sort of standard height that's proposed, it would be a total of 48 feet to the top of the building. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the next question we have, is thank you for sharing your concept plan with us. I understand that this is merely in the concept phase. It looks like the development is geared toward younger families, such with the apartments and stacked townhomes. Have you begun to consider connections to public transit, impacts on school capacity, accessibility to daycares, elements that are important to families? If that analysis and exploration has begun, please discuss your initial thinking.
Sure, those are all things that we've been thinking about, and I know that Scott and his team were looking at and why this property was attractive to them for this type of development. There's obviously a lot of existing resources and services like those mentioned in the area. Obviously, you have the elementary school and the middle school already located here, in Forest Lakes. So that infrastructure is there with lots of pedestrian connections and paths both along Route 29, as well as obviously through both the existing Forest Lakes neighborhood, but also through Brook Hill. If it's not there now, it will be developed as part of that project as it's developed. And so the property is located with good proximity, particularly to the services and amenities that will be provided in the Brook Hill community in terms of retail, grocery store, other shopping and services. And then ultimately, when the county develops the new high school and the new elementary school, obviously the location of this property will be extremely convenient to those. Also, proximity to things like the, soccer fields at Saka down on Polo Grounds Road and all of the other amenities with the transit. I don't know if transit's quite built out to this area, but I know there is transit and the county wants this area to be transit ready. So certainly along a major road like 29 that will be convenient for people to access transit as well as other places of employment, both whether it's 29 North with Rivanna Station and other employers there in the UVA Research Park, Hollymead Town Center, or areas to the south with those who may work downtown or in other areas. Trying to think if there's anything else. Childcare centers, I know there's some at Hollymead Town Center, or at Hollymead. There is some new childcare facilities there and some that have expanded. There's of course always a tremendous shortage of childcare facilities for everyone. So it may be that if there's not one already proposed for Brookville or Brook Hill, that one might end up being located nearby, knowing that there's even more families that are that would be coming. Scott or Todd, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, thank you, Valerie. That was fine. Thank you.
Okay, the next question is, where exactly is the county going to put all of the new students? The proposed development says little to nothing about this. For example, pointing at Albemarle High School as an implicit landing point for students from the new development, which is of course not possible. What is the developer proposing to do with regard to their on public education in Albemarle County? So Valerie, I can answer the first part of the question, and then you can answer the second part of the question. So as part of staff's review of a rezoning application, we do look at school enrollment numbers provided to us by the school system. We look at both the current enrollment numbers of the schools that these parcels that the students would be going to, as well as the projected enrollment of schools over the next 10 years. And we provide that information to the Board of Supervisors, showing whether the schools are at capacity, over capacity, under capacity. But ultimately it is up to the school board to determine how to address school levels, whether to build new schools, to redistrict, that sort of thing. However, the Board of Supervisors will take into account school capacity and student generation numbers in their deliberation of whether to approve or to deny a rezoning application.
I don't really have too much to add to that. I think you addressed that well. The only thing I might add is knowing that the county's been working hard at it. What I'll use the term alternative high school that they are working on. They call it Center One, that is in this area proximity. It's in what many people know as the former Comdial building. It's a completely new vision of how high schools will function and operate. And it may be that in the coming years, I think it's only been in existence for 1 year now, that the expansion of that facility as the concept continues will be able to help address some of the additional capacity needs that would be generated by this project, plus the ability to, for students who might live in the Albemarle High School district to, if they wanted to, try to apply to some of the other academies that are at some of the other high schools. So there are opportunities to shift those populations around, mostly voluntary. Thank you.
Okay, the next question is regarding setbacks. Regarding setbacks, in the narrative, the developer states that waiving the setbacks will not frustrate the design principles of the Places 29 plan. But does the loss of 10 units out of 362 really impact the design guidelines? Why not allow for more open space and wider sidewalks?
We're not proposing to, I don't think the width of the sidewalk is tied to the building's step back. Actually, can you read the question again? I'm sorry, I may have misunderstood the question, Andy.
Certainly. Regarding setbacks, in the narrative, the developer states that waiving setbacks will not frustrate the design principles of the Places 29 plan. But does the loss of 10 units out of 362 really impact the design guidelines? Why not allow for more open space and wider sidewalks?
Got it. Thank you. I appreciate it. So what we've proposed, we're not asking for relief from setbacks. What we're asking is that there's a concept called a building step back, which is that for buildings that are over 3 stories in height or 40 feet, anything above those has to have the building has to step back by 15 feet, starting with either the 4th floor or after 40 feet. And the concept is to allow for avoid areas being too crowded, sort of spatial, appropriate amounts of spatial enclosure. And commonly people say avoid the canyon effect is the term that's used. It's particularly important and usually applicable, most particularly along public roads. So from Route 29 or from Ashwood, making sure that that is appropriate. The buildings that we've proposed, or the main building that addresses this, is located quite a distance from Route 29. We do now understand we need to address the same issue with the 4/4 buildings, but we think that there's still sufficient amount of space between the public road and the start of these buildings such that that building step back would not be necessary. We have, again, 75 feet in some areas and 70 feet in others. So as opposed to when you have a building that's located right up against a road, at that point is when the canyon effect really becomes key, and you want to avoid after 40 feet or 3 floors. You want to step the building back to avoid creating that canyon effect. But the concern for that is substantially, in our opinions, reduced when the buildings are set so far back from either the adjacent property line or the adjacent roadway. But that doesn't have an impact on the width of sidewalks, at least not with this project. Thank you.
Okay, since we only have about 20 minutes left, I wanted to take a brief pause and just remind everybody that this community meeting, we are still at the very beginning of the process of the review of this project. It still does need to go, of course, to the Planning Commission for review by that body, who will make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors. And the Board of Supervisors will make a final decision. At this point, however, we are still under staff review of this project. So we have lots of questions tonight. I don't think we'll be able to get through all of them within the next 20 minutes, but I'd certainly be happy to address them via email or by phone or with a group email to everyone who's participating and to follow up with you on some of these questions. And certainly before the end of the meeting as well, I can put up my contact information again, both my email address and my phone number. And if you'd like to contact me and let me know your email address, I'd be happy to put you on a list of contacts so that when I send out future group emails and let you know the progress of this application, when new submissions are made, when the public hearing dates for the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors have been determined, I can send that information out to anyone who would be interested. So I'd be happy to do that. So getting back to the questions now, it looks like we have someone who's calling in. Carolyn, would you please dial him in? Okay, Scott, it looks like you're in. Please unmute and ask your question.
Who are you unmuting? Scott?
Scott, yes, please.
Oh, great.
Go
Okay. Thank you. I'm one of the members of the board of directors of the Forest Lakes Community Association, and we'll certainly want to work with you on a lot of these elements here. So thank you for taking the time and getting this started. As you know, we've been very involved in various developments that affect us. This is certainly no different. So I just started to analyze all the materials here, and it'll take a while, obviously, to do that. So I'm sure we'll want to work with you and get with you directly. But just a couple of quick comments here. A lot of it has to do with traffic here. And I think it was Valerie that said the intersection at Ashwood and 29 works just great. Well, not really. It's a level D service in the morning right now. And you're looking at putting 375 more units that would all come through the Ashwood connector there, or 90% of them to turn south onto 29 to go downtown to work in the morning. That's potentially a really high increase in the amount of traffic. And Ryan, I'd want to work with you and others in understanding how you came up with the numbers that you did. It really looks like a very relatively, frankly, small number of additional car trips in the morning that you're anticipating. We have a lot of experience here in Forest Lakes with this, and we spent a lot of time with Brook Hills, et cetera, as well, to make sure that we had that set up. Not something we're going to solve tonight, but something we certainly want to look at. Another comment relating to one of Valerie's points there is, you know, you compare it to Forest Lakes versus density and height especially, and the person that called in with respect to Ashland, I think it was, and his single family house. Remember that Forest Lakes is all two-story. The density is all two-story related. You've got 4-story buildings here that kind of hang over a bunch of community that is all two-story. And that's going to be obviously concerning in particular to the people in Ashland, pretty close to them and pretty high. The other thing is when you come into Forest Lakes on Ashwood Boulevard, you don't see anything because of the berms that are there. So it's not so much a matter of the distance from Ashwood to the beginning of parking lots and buildings. It's the fact that right now it's completely buffered. You have no idea that there's a trailer park there now. And be really concerned with a design that doesn't keep that buffering for people that turn off of 29 and into the nice enclave of Forest Lakes. That's something maybe you could address actually tonight and tell us about what kind of buffering you expect, and not just the distance of the buildings from Forest Lakes. I guess that's enough for now. We're gonna deal with you guys, quite a bit overall on this, and we look forward to it. I wish you had contacted us a little earlier, but it is what it is. We just saw this information recently.
Well, thank you for your comments. We're very interested and happy to work with you and others throughout the community to understand better your concerns and how we can work together and minimize any impacts to the extent absolutely possible on the Forest Lakes community. We're very familiar with how active and engaged you all were on the Brook Hill project, and we expected no different here. We knew you all would be very engaged. With regard to the traffic study, that's one of the many reasons we use the same traffic engineering firm for this project that handled the studies for the Brook Hill project. One, we think they're very good traffic engineers. Their predictions and recommendations have, at least with the projects I've been involved in, have been very accurate and proven to be accurate, once projects are developed, which is obviously important. But also because they were so involved in handling the Brook Hill traffic study that they know this area very well. They know the existing patterns, they know the history, they know the project at Brook Hill very well, what's proposed, and just having had that experience of knowing it, we felt like it was a very good fit to just continue and not have someone have to start over with the research or the analysis. According to our traffic study, you made a comment that the traffic at Ashwood and 29 was a level of service of D as in dog. By our traffic study, it's currently in the morning, it's a level of service of B as in boy, and in the evening or PM peak hour that it's a level of service A. So we may want to work with you on that and make sure we're all looking at the same information. that's the existing traffic conditions. And then it provides that if this property is not developed at all, it's left alone, it would continue to function at a high level. Both morning and afternoon would be a level of service of B as in boy. And then likewise with this project, it would be the same. It would continue to have the same level of service. So we want to talk with you. It may be that there's an individual movement, turning movement at one of those locations that isn't up to a B, but that the overall intersection function is a B. But again, we know that you all know these intersections better than everybody else, certainly better than we do. And so we'll look forward to getting your precise input on exactly where the problems are, what the choke points are, and how we can work with you all and obviously avoid certainly making them any worse if possible, and from this project, and making sure that appropriate improvements that are warranted by the traffic engineers are implemented. Trying to think what else. And obviously with regard to the fact that Forest Lakes is a 2-story community, we understand and want to obviously, we've seen and studied how effective the neighborhood was developed with regard to screening trees and buffering and things like that, particularly given the passage of time. All of that vegetation has really matured well, and I agree it's very effective in terms of its screening. So we want to have buildings that are well designed and appropriately sited and masked, but obviously that have an appropriate amount of screening and buffering as well. We haven't figured out those details yet, but certainly that's part of this process, and we would welcome your input on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Valerie. We have another question, and I'll kind of group these couple together. And they're more about the units. What is the price point proposed for these units, those to be sold and those to be rented, as well as how many 1, 2, 3 bedrooms will be in the apartments, how many 1, 2, 3 bedrooms in the townhomes, how many buildings will the townhome area consist of, and then related, will roads be county approved to allow school buses into the complex, and will public transportation be going to the complex, such as John or Cat?
All right, that's a lot packed into one question. We'll take those one at a time. In terms of the number of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units, I believe we had that in our materials, but let me bear with me. I can say that the townhouse units will all be, again, like a typical townhouse, probably a 3 or maybe a 4-story unit. The apartments is a mixture of 1, 2, and 3s. Scott, can you help me out in terms of the precise breakdown?
Yeah, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but in the Valerie just said the towns would be 1, 2, and I mean would be 3-story, but it's 3 bedroom. The apartments would be a mix of 1, 2s, and 3s. I don't know precisely what that mix is. If it was outlined in the application, I'm just not aware of what that is. And as far as the pricing, I don't know that either at this point. It'll be a market-driven analysis, and I'm just not aware of where the pricing will come out at this point.
Especially because it's several years away from
Exactly.
opening, obviously, if it's approved.
That's
But
correct.
it would be a market rate project, the apartments themselves. At least that's how it's proposed now. And again, the townhouses, portions of the townhouse units and the backside would be affordable to families making 80% or up to 80% of the area median family income. So obviously there's a lot of details that we still have to work out, but this is the concept as shown, that it would be a blend or a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom apartments. I believe, Scott, primarily 1s and 2s, not mostly 3s and 4s.
That's fair to say, yes. That's fair to say,
Okay, so I'll just repeat that in case it wasn't clear. Although the precise breakdown hasn't been developed yet, it would be mostly 1 and 2 bedroom units and not mostly 3 and 4 bedroom units.
And just to clarify further, the apartment portion of it will not have any 4 bedroom units. So it would be 1, 2s, and 3s, and again, the majority of which would be 1 and 2s.
Great. Were there more questions in that group of questions, Andy, that we didn't, or was there anything we didn't cover in that?
Yes. Did you answer how many buildings will the townhome area consist of? How many, I guess, overall structures?
Yeah, all right. I can pull up our.
So it would be 54 in lots. So multiplied by 2 is 108. And that's in those 5 buildings. Does that answer the question, Andy?
I think so, that there would be 5 structures of townhouse units.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, I've got, in terms of the structures themselves, I think you're talking apartments, Scott. There's 5 structures of apartments, but 8 structures of the townhouse units.
I'm sorry, that's right.
Along the back.
Yes, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. Yes.
All right.
Okay, so I just wanted to clarify that we're talking 5 structures of apartments and
Right.
8 structures of townhouse units.
Correct.
That's right. And that,
Okay.
again, for those who have pulled the plans from the website or might go look at them later, on sheet 4 of the plan set, that is shown, that, and that was one of the images I showed in my slides, and I could go back to it at some point if anyone ever wanted us to. But that's what's shown there. That is illustrative. That's the current vision for how it would be developed. Obviously, it's subject to change. It may be that it's fewer, but regardless, those buildings would have to be located within the building envelopes that are shown on the prior page, which is page 3 of the plans.
Okay, and then the next 2 parts in the question were more related to transportation. Will the roads be county approved to allow school buses into the complex, and will public transportation be going to the complex, i.e. jaunt or CAT?
Well, certainly we'll have to work with the county school transportation division to ensure that school buses can be accommodated in those locations where they want them to. I know that, and I'm no expert on this by any means, but my understanding is they sometimes want them, there to be a bus stop at the front of a community like this, or maybe internally. Once we get to that place, we'll make sure that it works. We obviously want to ensure that the school buses can conveniently serve the families of children who live in the area, however the county school division wants that done. We'll work with them on that. And sorry, again, the first question was about the school buses, and second was, there was a second.
Public transportation. Will public transportation be going into the development such as CAT or jaunt?
Yeah, we haven't worked out those details yet either, and we certainly can't dictate those issues, certainly with regard to CAT. My understanding is that the Brook Hill does have transit, is set up to accommodate transit. So at a minimum, we think it'll be very close by at Brook Hill. That maybe if there's a stop on 29 in front, that's something that could be accommodated for. Certainly, we hope that it will be transit accessible for those who want and need to be able to take advantage of public transit. And jaunt, my understanding is, has the ability to coordinate with homeowners and residents for service on an individual basis. So, but I hear that there may be other new options with jaunt coming forward, and I know there's the UVA shuttle bus that supports the research park as well, and other new ideas like that coming along. But certainly this is an ideal location for transit. We just don't control that issue.
Okay, it looks like we have another call from Scott. Carolyn, I don't know if you wanted to allow him to be dialed in.
Yeah, this is Scott. I just wanted to comment back to you on the level of service overall that's shown in the traffic study.
Okay, did we lose him?
Sounds like, yeah, it sounds like, Scott, that we lost you for a minute there.
Am I back now? Oh, great. Okay. You know, when you're in school, you just get one grade for the end of the year and you pass and you go on. But yes, that level is a B right now for Ashwood. But if you look at, I typed this in, if you look at the westbound left turn lane leaving Ashwood in the morning, that is currently a D like dog. Okay. You add 375 more units into that during peak rush hour, and that's got to create some backup here. And I don't see that in the traffic study. So it's kind of concerning to us here.
Thank you. And
Obviously,
again, oh, go ahead.
Obviously, we'll work with you on this ongoing, but I don't understand how you could possibly come up with that kind of result.
Thank you, Scott, and absolutely we'll sit down and make sure that we all have the same details and correct information. It might even make sense to have our traffic engineer with us. I am definitely not a traffic engineer. I can, read it as just like anyone else and not provide much more, but we understand that, we absolutely want to work with you on all these issues. And you're right, there are a few movements in that are D during certain hours in the mornings, and we'll work with you on that and get in the details and not get too much into the weeds on that, since I'm not qualified to speak on the traffic. We'll get our expert together and help us make sure we all understand and are on the same page. So thank you.
Okay, it looks like we only have a few minutes left, so I'll do one last question here and then we'll begin to wrap up. However, I did want to take the time to say that the chat questions and answers that everyone has typed in, those will be made available as well with the recording. The chat question box will be made available as a text file, and that'll be placed in the same part of the website as the recording of this meeting, so that those questions can be reviewed again and that we can follow up with all of those questions in the days following the meeting. However, the final question is about buffers. What is the developer willing to commit to as a suitable or sizable buffer between the development and existing Forest Lakes homes? And can you please address the Cricklewood Court buffer as well?
Valerie, you're on mute.
Thank you. So for those who may not know or live in this area, Cricklewood Court is obviously a cul-de-sac within Forest Lakes. It's not part of the Ashland community. It's the next one over off of Birchcrest Lane. And Cricklewood Court essentially backs right up to the northeast corner of this property. And so that buffer area would be the same as along the entire border of that side of the project, which again is currently is a 20-foot buffer along the entire edge of that property. And then there's also additional areas of land that are undeveloped based on, or that would be undeveloped or would not include building areas. So there'd be some stormwater management facilities in between the buffer and the buildings. Over in the corner closest to that, there would be the corner of the closest building, at least on our conceptual plan, is, I can see the number better, is 87.5 feet away from the property line. There is a small portion of the a parking lot that's a little bit closer, about 3 parking spaces that are closer there. But that's what we're showing on our plans. It would be 20 feet undisturbed, and then additional planting areas, stormwater management facilities in that area, which may be an underground facility, maybe an above ground or a natural looking area like a bioswale or something like that. Ryan can speak to the differences, but we did work hard to try and show and demonstrate and commit to having buildings not being right up against the property line, or even, at a minimum 20 feet away, or have a 20-foot undisturbed buffer, but the buildings would be set back even further. But we wanted to leave room for landscaping and other enhancements like that to help screen it and soften the view of the buildings, like you all have done so well in Forest Lakes. Brian, do you have anything to add in terms of that issue?
No, I think you answered it well. I believe just to answer on the stormwater management component there, everything would be aesthetically pleasing to the county and to the state code, and to be able to handle the runoff prior to leaving the site there.
Great, thank you. Let me, if I can add just one thing about the sort of binding nature of the application plan, if that helps address the concern. If the project is approved, whatever buffer area is shown on the approved application plan will be binding on the developer. So any site plans or subdivision plats that would come along afterwards would have to be consistent with the approved application plan or master plan. So if there's a 20-foot buffer shown and the applicant then submits a site plan application that shows a 15-foot buffer, that would not be approved. The county will enforce that strictly against the applicant. So if that helps, and I'm sure Andy can elaborate on that issue if necessary.
Thank you, Valerie. Yes, unfortunately, we are out of time, and I know we still have several comments left. I don't think we're going to be able to get to them tonight. However, I will put up my contact information, both my phone number and my email address. And so if any of your questions were not addressed here tonight, please go ahead and send them to me, email them to me, or call me and ask, and I'd be happy to follow up with you. And like I mentioned earlier, I'd also be happy to include you on a contact list so that you can be notified of future developments on this project as the application continues through the review process, including any new submittals of the application with any revisions that have been made, as well as when the dates for the Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors public hearings have been determined. So let me get my contact information up here. Again, my name is Andy Reidelbach. I'm a senior planner. My email is mreidelbach@albemarle.org, and my phone number is 434-296-5832, extension 3261. That's it. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight, and thank you, Valerie, and members of your team for coming and answering the many questions that we've had tonight. And I'm sure that we'll be getting many more as this project moves along, including any that we maybe didn't get to answer tonight. And as I mentioned, we'll certainly be happy to answer those, and either I'll answer them if they're more process questions, or I'd be happy to forward them along to Valerie and her team if they're more about the details and the proposals of the plan. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We'll just
Thank
echo
you.
what he said. We really appreciate everyone taking the time to join us tonight and be so engaged with the process. And we look forward to working with all of you in the coming months.
Thank you all very much. Good night.